And welcome back. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services, states reported over 500,000 victims of child abuse and neglect. 76% of those victims are neglected, 16% are physically abused, and about 10% are sexually abused, and little than, well, 0.2%, I would say, are actually sex trafficked. Now, for more than 30 years, the New York Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program has given children the tools they need to prevent as well as report abuse. We're pleased to have joining us to discuss more about this is the manager of Child Abuse Prevention Program at the New York Foundling, Trevor Raushi. And Trevor, glad to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Daren. Thank you for having us. How are you?
Thank you. I'm glad to have you here with us, and glad to have you talking about. Well, not glad, but glad to have you as a voice in this particular matter. Trevor, when we talk about child abuse, I gave some statistics at the beginning of the show, but give us from your perspective just how prevalent child abuse is right here in New York.
Well, as you described, Daren, child abuse manifests itself in many different ways, right? You discussed physical abuse, sexual abuse, you mentioned neglect, all of those different ways that child abuse can come up and manifest itself in a child's life. And so when you consider all of that, it is pretty common, unfortunately, right? But there are also ways to address it. And at the Child Abuse Prevention Program within the New York Foundling, we are covering all of our bases, and we are certainly trying to address it from every direction in which we can by educating children, parents and caregivers, and even the professionals at schools that are involved in these children's lives.
Yeah. When we talk about education about child abuse and really making the public more and more aware, before we go into a little bit more in depth, give me your assessment. Do you feel as though people are even ready to have that conversation? Because it's a touchy situation. And to bring it up and to talk about it and to have it received and then to have action taken on it, we find sometimes people aren't really as fast and proactive in this area.
I understand what you're saying, and that to an extent, I agree that that is true. Some people can be reluctant to talk about it. It is an uncomfortable subject, of course. It can be an unpleasant subject. However, it's an important subject to address. And I would add on to that and extend that to say that I think that sometimes in our society, folks are uncomfortable addressing this topic specifically with children. However, is there a group of people who need to discuss this topic more than children, right? They are the victims of child abuse inherently. And so it is our duty as a society and as the adults that are tasked with caring for children to educate them and to arm them with the tools that they need to be able to identify and report if they are in an unsafe situation, if they are being groomed, or if they are or have been abused.
So we talk about making people aware, and I know, as we said, New York Foundling does a great job in terms of educating everybody from parents all the way down to the child themselves. Let's talk about having a conversation with children and the work that you're doing right there, because there is a great amount of awareness that you're doing by putting armed information in the hands of children.
Absolutely. So the cornerstone of CAPP, the Child Abuse Prevention Program's work, you mentioned we've been servicing New York City schools and New York City communities since 1986. And the cornerstone of our work is our Child Safety Workshop. Now, this workshop is a interactive hour-long workshop designed specifically for elementary age children that uses life-size puppets to talk about this very serious topic in a fun and engaging way. And so we bring these life-size puppets to elementary schools across all of New York City, all 5 boroughs, and they share their stories about physical abuse, sexual abuse. They discuss safe and unsafe touch, the difference between abuse and punishment, and they help, most importantly, probably, they help children identify trusted adults and arm them with the tools they need to communicate and speak to those trusted adults if they have ever been or are currently in an unsafe situation.
When you talk about educating young people in that kind of way, using puppets, making it a little bit more friendly, making it a little less, making it more light. Talk about the receptivity of young people who, who are getting this information. What's the takeaway that you're seeing amongst them?
Watching students participate in this workshop is one of the most interesting parts of this job, I believe. When the workshop begins, you might see some giggles, you might see some smiles on their faces, right? And it might feel like it's about to be an hour full of fun, and it is. But as soon as the puppets start sharing their stories and the the trained facilitators start leading the conversations, right? You see that the fun quickly transitions to a learning opportunity. And the wheels start turning in these children's head when they're participating in this workshop, and they start thinking about their own experiences and applying the messaging to their own lived experience. And sometimes you have children in the audience that are then questioning, is what's happening to me safe? Or is what happened to me last year okay? Or is this something that I should talk to an adult about? Is this something that I should reach out and ask for help about? And that's the exact goal of the workshop.
Are we finding the kids are asking a lot of questions?
Yes. So the students have the opportunity, and I should explain, the workshop is typically facilitated for about 75 to 120 students at a time, maybe the whole third grade, let's say. So the students participate as a grade, and they can ask questions and interact throughout the workshop. However, what sets our program and our workshop apart from some similar programs is that there is a built-in component at the end of the workshop where any students who may have a follow-up question or something personal that they want to share, they have the chance to speak with one of our trained facilitators or their school counselor or school social worker immediately following the workshop. And that is a crucial component to this workshop. We do believe that it would be inappropriate to share this messaging with children, right? To give them this messaging, tell them that if something unsafe happens to them, that they should tell an adult, but then not provide them with that opportunity to do so. And so it's during that time, immediately following the workshop, where students can stay and speak with our facilitators or their school counselor and ask follow-up questions or share something that might be a safety concern that they're currently experiencing. Ask for help.
You mentioned third graders. Is there any particular reason that you use third graders as a target audience?
All students, all children of all ages deserve and are entitled to educational lessons about these topics, right? They deserve to know about this. They deserve to be equipped with these tools. Our specific workshop, the Child Safety Workshop, it is designed specifically for this age group of elementary age children. So the language we use, the details of the stories that we share are carefully designed to be appropriate and engaging for the elementary age student, as well as the life-size puppets, right? At that age, they still really engage with the puppets. They find them to be interesting. They can follow the stories really well. If you get a little older, I'm not so sure I would take a puppet in and try to have a conversation with a high school student, right?
Yeah.
I might get laughed out of the auditorium.
Yeah. I mean, well, after a while, I think, well, no, that's not true. I think there's some adults who still enjoy puppets, but they're few and far.
Right.
They're definitely few and far between. Speaking of adults, talk to me about your work there, because in addition to educating children, you're also taking the time to make sure the parents are also looking out for warning signs as well.
Absolutely. Parents and professionals. So the way that we connect with the children first is by inviting their school counselors and school social workers to a full-day professional training that we host, where we share with them everything we know about child abuse and maltreatment, the warning signs, and we share with them extensive resources that we have, localized resources in their neighborhood to help them address and respond to signs of child abuse and maltreatment if they see them. So that's what we do with the professionals first. But then, yes, about 7 years ago, we created 2 parent and community workshops, one on the topic of positive parenting and the other on the topic of internet safety. Now, both of these workshops were created because through our work with the children, we would hear different stories, different disclosures that involved different safety concerns. And one of the first questions we would always ask children, when we're taking these disclosures, when we're speaking with them, when we're working with them, is, did you tell your parent? Did you tell your caregiver? Did you share this with your family, right? Did you ask that person that you live with, that adult, for help? And very often we were hearing no, for a variety of reasons. Some of them might have been scared. Some of them might have been intimidated. Some of them might not have had the language or known that this was, something that they should be sharing. And so we created these parent and community workshops as a way of bridging that gap and addressing these problems from all angles, right? So not just with the children, but also with the parents and their guardians and the adults in their lives that are tasked with taking care of them.
And so for those who may just be joining us, we've got Trevor Raushi, who's the manager of Child Abuse Prevention Program at the New York Foundling, who does a great job of really educating parents and caregivers and those as well as children in the area of child abuse prevention. Trevor, when we talk about child abuse prevention in the New York Foundling, obviously it's something that you take very seriously. What else do you offer at the Foundling when it comes to child abuse prevention?
Well, the Child Abuse Prevention Program is just one of many different programs that the New York Foundling has to offer. The New York Foundling is a citywide agency that has a presence in all 5 boroughs. We have many different departments that offer services for adults with developmental disabilities. We cater to youth and foster care by providing tutoring services and support for the families, both the foster parents and the children, college prep. The list goes on and on. I am consistently in awe of my peers and colleagues at the New York Foundling, and I always appreciate getting a little insight into the programs that they run as well and getting able to collaborate, especially with them, because there is such an extensive reach that we do have, and it is only growing. You know, the Foundling's goal is to really support every community and support every child in reaching their full potential. So I'm impressed every day with the work that my colleagues do, and it is not just the Child Abuse Prevention Program. It is definitely the agency-wide.
Yeah. And when we talk about the agency-wide work, obviously the New York Foundling has been around for a while doing the work. When we talk about child abuse and really these numbers that we're taking a look at, give me a little bit of insight into COVID, because did you see a spike in reporting or the need for counseling or the need to really beef up services with the fact that so many people are now living indoors?
Absolutely. And first of all, I was really proud of my team specifically. We were able to, when the pandemic hit and the schools went remote, we were able to get really creative. And even in isolation from 5 different locations, we were able to use the technology to our advantage and somehow record this hour-long workshop with the life-size puppets and continue to facilitate the workshop even during the pandemic while the schools were remote, while the children were remote learning. So that was pretty impressive, and I just want to give a shout out to my team for that, because we're so grateful that we were able to do so. But then, yes, after once schools kind of went back into the building and we were able to bring our workshop back into the building as well, we did start to hear some different things coming from the students, right? Different experiences, and a lot of which involved technology, right? Which makes perfect sense. You know, during the pandemic, all of us, including children, were spending more time using technology. And so what we heard and what we're continuing to hear is the different nuanced ways that technology is now involved and intersects with child abuse. I'll give you one example, for instance, without sharing any personal information or any graphic details. I was in an elementary school, and I was working with a child and took a disclosure from a young girl, 8 years old, who was currently experiencing sexual abuse. She had not shared this with any other adults in her lives before. And one of the reasons why is because she was being bribed by this immediate family member who was abusing her. Now, a bribe is not something new to us, right? Especially when we think of the grooming process. However, this bribe was not US dollar. It was the gaming currency, so digital tokens for a very popular online game that we know many, many, many elementary students are using very frequently. And so that, raised a red flag for us and set off an alarm, because that was something that we hadn't really heard before. It was certainly new and related to the technology. And we were pretty confident that it was something that parents and caregivers also weren't necessarily familiar with and wouldn't always be looking out for. And so that, again, is another example of something that we have learned from our work with children that we then brought to our parent and community workshops to share with the adults as well, so that they can better understand how they can work to help protect their children and keep them safe.
Yeah, you kind of led into what I wanted to talk about, because if I'm a parent or an adult, what are some of the warning signs and things that I should be looking for when we talk about child abuse?
Something that we encourage all the parents and caregivers that attend our workshops to focus on is communication, right? So open lines of communication with your children, with your families, meaning you don't necessarily want your children to be scared of you. Of course, you want them to respect you, and when it comes to discipline and guidance, children need discipline, but we don't want them to be scared of you, because should something happen to them, should they find themselves in an unsafe situation, should they find themselves being groomed by a predator, you are the person that you want them to come and talk to. You are the person that you want them to reach out to and ask for help, because you are responsible for that. And so really to focus on talking to your children at all ages about abuse and abuse prevention. That includes body autonomy, right? The anatomic names for our body parts, equipping them with that knowledge. That is one of the best things you can do as a parent or a caregiver to protect your child from abuse.
And so when you notice abuse, what are the things that we can do if we're in the unfortunate situation of knowing a child that's been abused? Where do we take it from there?
Right. we always direct families, your school is a great resource, right? You use your school counselor, your school social worker, your child's school counselor, or your child's school social worker. They are very well-trained and compassionate individuals who are lifelines for many of these students, many of these children. But if you notice something or if your child does disclose something to you, the best thing you can do is support them, right? Be mindful of your reaction, of course, right? What they might share with you might be alarming, it might be upsetting, but as the adults in their lives, we need to focus on supporting them and not necessarily letting our emotional reaction lead our response. And then, of course, reporting it to authorities is the best thing you can do, whether that's your local precinct or calling the New York State hotline. There is an anonymous reporting hotline in New York State that you can use. But again, just reaching out to your local authorities is also a great option.
Yeah. And if I'm torn, because the word I want to use is torn, because sometimes I think there are parents or people out there who things may be on the fringe, right? I want to get it checked out, but if it's not, I really don't want this person to get in trouble. You've been down that street before, right? Where people have really come to you. How does a person navigate that particular point?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you bringing that back up and circling back to that, because especially when we think about physical abuse or neglect, that's not always a black and white case, right? Sometimes families just need extra resources. They need support. They need knowledge, right? Part of what we do in our parenting workshop is talk about New York State law, because we do have a lot of immigrant families here in New York City as well who might simply just not know what is legal and what is illegal in the state of New York when it comes to disciplining our children. And so that's a starting point, right? First, assess the situation and determine is this adult, abusing this child, or are they in a stressful situation and could possibly use resources like therapy, help with food and grocery money, help with a job search, any of those things that can increase the stress factors in the home that could ultimately increase the risk of a child being hurt, right? So yes, jumping to make a report is never, something that we recommend. Assessing the full situation and, of course, intervening and providing assistance or support is always ideal.
When we look at the numbers and we see the numbers are, somewhat staggering, and we're looking and we're seeing that there, I want to say, a lot of unreported cases as well. Would you agree? I mean, we talk about the numbers that are staggering already. Would you say that there's probably a slew more that just don't get reported?
Yes, unfortunately, I would say that there probably are a number of cases that do not get reported, and there's a number of reasons why they may not get reported, right? And so for children, as we mentioned earlier, children might not report to adults because they might be afraid of repercussions. They might be afraid that they did something wrong. Predators are really skilled at grooming children, and so typically before they've done any abuse, they will convince the child that they are in the wrong, that they did something to bring this onto themselves, right? And that they are not in a position to ask for help. And so that's one barrier. Additionally, the way that we talk about these topics, right? Or the lack of the way that we talk about these topics. Sometimes, as you mentioned when we started this interview, adults are afraid to address this. Adults are afraid to bring this up because of, the can of worms that it may open. And that's not fair. As adults, we can't let our own fears or our own inability or our own lack of confidence in discussing these topics hinder the way that we're protecting our children. So those are the two biggest barriers, I would say.
But I do think we can also say that a lot of progress has been made in this area, because for a long time we weren't really talking and bringing child abuse to the forefront. It was something that was pretty much spoken about, but spoken about at low volume, low decibel. But now you could definitely look out there and say we see commercials, we see conversations, we see forums, we see things like you've got the New York Foundling, where a huge amount of awareness and public participation is taking place.
Absolutely. Even on a larger scale, when you see things like the Me Too movement, which came about in the last 10 years, right? Movements like that as a culture are wonderful because it brings the conversation to the spotlight, right? It works to remove the blame from the victim, from the survivor, and focus the blame on who actually deserves it, right? Which is the perpetrator. And so we can take a lot and learn a lot from, a movement like that.
For yourself, looking at this work that you've done, talk to me about how do you see the impact of the CAPP program at New York Foundling?
Now that I've been working with the CAPP program for over 7 years, I think that I have actually seen an impact in the yearly sort of reports that we get, right? I've seen a decrease in those sort of gray physical abuse cases that we would sometimes get, because I think that our three-pronged approach of really trying to reach professionals, parents and families, and children is actually helping to get the message across and actually helping to provide support and services across the city, and therefore decrease some of the risk factors that do lead to physical abuse particularly. So that's been, a really wonderful thing to see. Additionally, as we sort of, we have researchers at the Foundling. We have lots of different programs that work on doing professional developments for professionals like us internally, but also externally as well. And we attend those webinar sessions, we attend those info sessions, and we review the most current and recent research. And we use that to inform our practices and inform even the script and the language that we use in the workshops, so that we can stay abreast of the most current issues and really stay relevant and adapt as time changes. The greatest example I can give is just the way the technology is continuing to become more and more important and more involved in even young people's lives, right?
And when we look at technology, I'm thinking about, the emergence of, from things that happen on phones to online, social media. You have so many different things that people have to be worried about, Snapchat. But if you're a parent and you're not on these things, sometimes it's hard to even know what to do. That's why I'm leading to a question. When you have workshops, people can really take part in these things. When are some of the upcoming workshops that people can be a part of?
So we actually have one of the parent and community workshops coming up this Friday at 9 a.m. We offer these via Zoom. It makes them more accessible for parents and caregivers to join at their convenience. They can join from their phone. They can join with their cameras on or cameras off, whatever is most comfortable for them. And we encourage them to participate even in the chat feature. So as the year continues, right, we do usually base our schedule around the school schedule. But what we'll do is we'll host 2 parent workshops at least every single month live on Zoom. And we'll be making those links and those invitations available on the New York Foundling website. So folks can check out the New York Foundling website and look for those links and join us in any of our upcoming parent workshops on either one of the 2 topics that we offer.
Yeah. Talk to me about, we're not throwing any stones here, but talk to me about elected officials. Do you feel as though government, elected officials, those in the community are really starting to wrap around the topic of child abuse and really child abuse prevention?
I do. We're very grateful. We get a large amount of funding from the city council here in New York City, specifically my program does. So we're very grateful to the city council. We work with them quite closely. They do have a very vested interest in this topic, and they have been nothing but great supporters so far. But yes, I think in addition to that, making the conversation intersectional, right? So talking about the mental health crisis and just the pandemic and the impact that's had on everyone as well. So just broadening the conversation itself, I think, has really helped everyone, regardless of their position or maybe their profession, play a part in ending child abuse or at least decreasing child abuse. So it doesn't matter if you're a politician, if you work in school, if you work in a nonprofit, even if you work at a bank, right? There's something you can do, right? You could keep a watchful eye out. You can keep yourself in the loop and understand, the signs that you could be looking out for, right, to help prevent this.
Mm-hmm. And for parents, say for instance you have a parent of a child that's been sexually abused, sometimes by someone on the outside, very traumatic. Are there support groups that are available for parents of children who've had victims of child abuse?
That's a really excellent question, and I do believe that the New York Foundling has therapy programs in place to support families, especially once they become involved in the child welfare system, if they need to make a report of abuse for that instance, right? However, if there are community-based groups that meet, I would be interested in, finding that out and partnering with them, because that actually seems like a really helpful resource. So I'm going to make a note to kind of check that out, because I do think that that space in particular could be an exceptionally poignant and purposeful space for parents to meet and be able to share those experiences. Because although it may feel like a very insurmountable and unique experience for one parent when they're going through something like this, unfortunately, as we mentioned, it's not, right? It's not that unique of an experience. And there's nothing more valuable than having a community of folks to sort of, guide you through this. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, well, I was pretty interested, and get back to me and let me know if that's going on. Getting down on our time here before we close, I want to get you an opportunity to be able to share a little bit about how people can get connected to New York Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program and what's needed.
Right. So, we are a school-based workshop, a school-based program. So typically we facilitate these workshops in elementary schools across the city. Largely, we are in the New York City DOE schools. We partner with the school counselors and school social workers. If you are a parent and caregiver and you're watching this and you're not sure if your school hosts CAPP, hosts the Child Abuse Prevention Program, reach out to your school admin or your school counselor and ask them, right? Ask them if they are hosting the CAPP Child Safety Workshop this year. And if they're not, suggest they do so. Additionally, if you are a parent who has children involved in a charter school or a private school, we are also able to serve those schools. And so same thing, reach out to your school professionals and ask if they have heard of us, if they've used us, and if not, encourage them to do so because we are a really helpful resource.
Yeah. I know it's a very serious work that you do, but if there's any joy in the consolation of what you do, what would that be?
No, there's lots of joy in this, right? Again, our workshop is primarily preventative. We hope that when we go facilitate this workshop every morning to a group of third graders, that no one discloses anything, traumatic or of in the nature of a safety concern immediately following the workshop. Our goal is to provide this messaging and provide these tools before anything happens. So oftentimes, we get to facilitate these workshops and interact with students and, really hear them leave the room feeling empowered, feeling stronger than they came in, and with a whole, toolkit of knowledge and terms that they didn't have when they came in. And it's really kind of an exciting thing, and it feels good. And sometimes for a lot of kids, it's the first time they've heard anything like this, and it's the first time they've been told that, no one does have the right to touch them. No one does have the right to hurt them. So there's a lot of really empowering aspects to the job as well.
Trevor Raushi, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. Great work being done at the Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the number they can get at to you?
212-660-1376. That's 212-660-1376. Thank you so much, Daren.
All right, Trevor Raushi, we're leaving it there. Taking a quick break. We'll have more right after this.